thought I saw Scott.
Yeah, he's here. I think he just went back.
Maybe to the restroom.
Go. Call to order a meeting for the Normal Town Council for Monday, December 16th, 2019. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy? Mrs. Cummings?
Here.
Mr. Nord?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We've had two requests for public comment tonight. The first is Doug Fansler.
Hello, I'm Doug Fansler, live at Carriage Hills Road in Normal. I am looking for some clarification tonight. I obviously won't get an answer right now, but at some point during the proceeds when you're discussing this $25,000 change or additional funding that's not a budgeted item, at least the way I read it, I would like to know why, when $96,000 apparently was impossible to find, that we can all of a sudden additionally add $25,000 to that same budget. The amount of money that's the difference between that when you talk about that, us citizens need to understand why we couldn't find that 96 and why all of a sudden within weeks we can also spend an additional 25,000. Doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Next speaker is Carl Sela.
Morning, Carl Sela from Normal. Because of the way the illegal public comment policy is worded, I have to talk about things on the agenda. So I will couch things in terms of what's on the agenda. Community investment plan kind of determines how we're going to be spending money in the years going forward. An investment plan has two sides. One, what you're going to spend, where you're going to put the money, and two, where it's coming from. So, anyway, where it's coming from? Well, as the previous commenter just said, 25,000, poof, right there. Instead of adding other things to the budget, I've been told several times, plan your work your plan. Why doesn't that apply here? Furthermore, community investment is much easier if you're not giving away sweetheart deals like Wild Country, which pays absolutely no rent. That's poor management of the town's real estate portfolio. And further, the disguising of CRBN personnel as normal employees. A couple weeks ago, there was a big discussion about, okay, how are we going to pay for pension funding? Well, this is just expanding our pension funding and our further debt. We need to have better management of town resources, and in that way, makes it easier to fund the community investment plan.
Excuse me. We move to the omnibus agenda, items considered routine will be handled with one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. Mr. Nord.
B, C, D, and E.
I'm sorry?
B, C, D, and E.
Well, there is no item E. That was removed from the agenda.
That was removed.
No, E is
He's the diabetes.
Oh, that's diabetes.
Oh, okay. I've got the previous
You got the
version.
previous one there. Okay.
Move approval.
Thank you. And items, do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Items approved under the omnibus agenda are approval of the minutes. Item B is a report to receive and file town of normal expenditures for payment as of December 11th, 2019. Mr. Nord.
I so move.
Second.
Oh. Sorry, we have to call the roll. Hold that thought for one moment. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The minutes are approved. I'm sorry, Mr. Nord. We have a motion from Mr. Nord on item B. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nord.
For item B, I know this was short notice, Ms. Reese, so I just want to put this out there for the next agenda. A citizen had asked, and I thought it was a great ask, that when we go over the town expenditures, if you could highlight some of the higher anticipated expenses that had occurred and any savings that your staff has found with relation to those expenses. And also if you could kind of highlight a couple areas that your staff are working on to lower expenses and increase the taxpayer benefit. This is just so the public kind of knows what to expect and what's going on, because there are so many numbers there, it's very hard for anyone to keep track of it. So that's my request.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure how we can do that every 2 weeks, given the quantity of bills that we pay. So if you could perhaps be a little bit more specific on what you are looking for, because honestly, if you look at some of these expenses, there's cleaning products, there's boots for firefighters, there's toner for ink cartridges, and are you looking for a specific dollar amount and above? Because I can tell you that our staff is very much aware of council's interest in being fiscally responsible, and we are checking prices, we're doing our best, and if we're gonna, if you want me to start asking department heads to track each expense and who we called and report back to you on those choices, we can do that, but obviously that takes time and is probably not particularly efficient. So is there a specific dollar amount and above that you're looking for?
Not so much a dollar amount, but maybe give us like a top 5, just something that would be like for public education, and you can choose. I mean, we don't need to go through all of them. You choose, just something for public
Pick
education.
5 every 2 weeks?
I'm going to interject on this for a moment. Again, going back to council actions, anything under $25,000 has full purview of Ms. Reese as city manager. And anything over that has been done by council action. So there has been explanations. Maybe it's not that same night. And if this citizen would like that information, I'm sure that citizen could contact us and we could provide that information. But the amount of work that you're asking staff to do at this point, I don't see the value of it, because the larger dollar items and things that you're asking for have been approved by prior council action.
I just thought it would be good for public education to know just a few, and Ms. Reese can pick those, but if she chooses not to, then she chooses not to.
Thank you. Further on this item? Ms. Lorenz?
I would just underscore that I think the items on the bills that we file every 2 weeks are within the confines of the budget that is approved. And I believe that our staff is held to be accountable to adhere to that budget. If they didn't, they would have to fess up for that or, account for that in some way to our city manager. I think we just need to be careful as essentially a board of directors. While it's important to exercise our fiduciary responsibility, which Mr. Nord, I think maybe is what you're getting at, I think we need to remember that we hold our city manager accountable to holding the department heads accountable. And I believe that we have a group of department heads who are professional and competent. And to start delving deeper into line items would either suggest that we want to change the level of governance of this board of directors to be more of a working board, but even a working board really doesn't usually get into that level of detail. Or we have some concern that our staff department heads are not competent, and I don't believe that to be the case. So if you've got a concern about the competency level or the level at which this board operates, then that maybe is the better discussion to have.
Ms. Smith?
For Ms. Reese, we did get a actual versus budget report following the audit report. How frequently do you generate that format?
The report that came back to council after the audit, I think it was in July, is when we provided that report to you. That comes out once a year with all the changes for the whole year. Each month, when you get the financial report from the finance department, we send it out electronically, I believe. That should show tracking of year-to-date versus budget, and also compared to last year.
So it's just not a standard release with the council packet, but that document is available and distributed to all of us?
Correct.
Okay.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The report to receive and file is approved. Item C is a resolution authorizing financial support of the Compact Workforce Development Program for 2020 in the amount of $25,000 and an associated budget adjustment. Mr. Nord?
I so move.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nord?
To start off with, there was a public comment about the $25,000 and how that was found when just the meeting we just had, 96,000 was so hard to find. I'd like to hear the answer to his question.
Well, the last meeting when the city council authorized the property tax levy, that would be for taxes collected next year. It'd be the 2019 levy collected in 2020. In this particular instance, what we've asked council for is a budget adjustment to support funding the workforce development program, which we have not funded since February of 2018. In this case, we did not budget for it, but we're asking for a budget adjustment, which means the money would come out of reserves.
How much do we have in reserves? mean-
I did not bring my most recent financial report with me. I apologize for that. I have my budget, but I don't want to pull something out of the air without spending time looking that up.
Okay. Then, the rest of the questions, I guess, would be more for the chamber then.
Yeah. And I will say, our goal always for the general fund is a 15% reserve, 15% of our annual expenses. Where we are at today with our reserves level, I don't know. It could be 14.5, it could be 15.2, I don't know specifically. So I just wanted to clarify with that. But our goal is 15% reserves. And if there are no additional questions for me, I will invite the Chamber of Commerce representatives to come forward.
Thank you very much. Along with me, I did bring Jane C. LaFollette, who's the manager for our compact workforce development efforts, to aid in the questions that I might not be able to answer.
We had talked a little bit before the meeting, so it kind of gave you quite a few of the questions and kind of the interest that I had. So I'll kind of open it up to you if you want to talk about what Compact is, kind of where it's been, and tell us what the money is going to be used for, what the measurable results are that taxpayers should be looking for from the investment.
Sure. And so thank you for the opportunity to visit with council tonight to talk about Compact. I'm very proud of the work that we've done over the last few years as it comes to workforce development and creation and ongoing of Compact. And so I think maybe to answer a few things, and so you might recall just a few short months ago, we did do a presentation to the joint councils that related to the work that's happened over the last year to 16 months for Compact and the efforts that we're doing to be inclusive to the community as a whole. And so I don't want to regurgitate all the things that we put out to you not too long ago, but I will tell you that, there was some discussion about, the Chamber is indeed a membership organization. But when Being Advantage came, several years ago, the intent was to look at a community development, economic development, marketing strategy. And so what role did we have to play in that? And so the outcome of that strategy, which was just a strategy, was to determine, when we look at different industries that we want to grow intentionally in Bloomington Normal to help diversify our economy, how do we find the workforce in order to make that happen? And so what we did was we created a group of people that became the Workforce Development Committee of the Chamber, started doing our work, but at that same time realized that McLean County Community Compact had been in existence for a long while. And so with an opportunity to rejuvenate the work that they had done and commingle it with the work that we wanted to do at the Chamber, brought it together in March of last year. We brought Compact as a subsidiary under the Chamber to where it's its own 501c3, governed by its own board of directors with its own financials, and it is indeed, it's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chamber, but it's managed completely separately from the Chamber. So intentionally of this effort was to be inclusive of everything that happens within the community, to make sure that we're looking at every population, every demographic, every opportunity to look at how we build that talent pipeline. Because at the end of the day, for the employers who have invested here, member or not, we need to make sure that to grow our economy, to continue to grow our population, and to take a look at growing our GDP, how do we do that? By growing jobs and bringing people and having that talent pipeline for those companies who have invested here and those companies are yet to invest here. Excuse me. So I think from a measurable standpoint, one of the things that we've really looked at over the last couple of years is we're highly engaged in an organization called 60 by 25 Network, which is 60% of your population has a post-secondary credential by the year 2025. That doesn't mean a college degree. That means post-secondary credential. It could be a licensure, it could be any kind of additional certificate program. And so what we're really paying attention to as we look at Bloomington Normal and a fairly highly educated community that we are, how do we continue to move forward? And so while we are fairly close to that 60% of our population, around 57% right now, how do we make sure that our future trajectory, should have brought some water, and I talk fast, will allow us to make sure that we're on that pathway for sustainability of keeping that educated group that we're looking for our employers. And so we continue to participate with 60 by 25, but also creating a metric dashboard. That dashboard will be released in the near future as we continue to focus on our deliverables that will be on a new Compact website that will be, it'll be soft launched this week, but will come out probably a few weeks later as we continue to look at that. Because we want to make sure that we're providing the return on the investment that not only you from the public sector, but the private sector investors. So from the public sector, we've had about 22% is the total budget of public funds that have come into making this happen so far. So that's maybe just a quick overview, and you might have some specific additional questions, but I'll turn it over to Jane, see if there's anything you'd like to add.
To address Mr. Nord's question in regards to some of the programs that we do under the McLean County Community Compact.
Thank you very much.
We focus on really secondary and post-secondary education pipeline building. So we work with our high schools and our higher institutions of higher education. We've produced 2 education to employer summits this past year. Those focused on, our spring one focused on secondary innovative collaborations that are happening within our community, within McLean County, and how we are building a pipeline pipeline for students to explore careers, not necessarily if they're going to college or career right out of high school. So we've started those conversations to bring employers and educators and community members together to really have a platform to have those conversations. This fall, we hosted the Fall Education to Employer Summit, which focused on post-secondary education. We actually had representation from all of our institutions of higher ed and had a fireside chat. It was a lovely event, but really focused on how education, higher ed, can help build our talent pipeline here, grow our talent pipeline here. In addition to that, we're also focusing on a program we piloted in 2019. It was called Becoming BN. There's a lot of BNs in Bloomington Normal. I'm new, moved here in April, so I'm still learning. But Becoming BN is a program that focuses on really summer interns or graduate students who are visiting Bloomington Normal for the summer and exposing them to different opportunities in the community beyond doing the Walmart run or staying on campus or staying at your internship. And so we did a few things like the Shakespeare Festival, we went out to the Corn Crib, we did a tour of Distill, so just really exposing them to some of the innovative and really cool things that are happening in this community to engage them beyond their regular day-to-day. We also brought in community leaders and CEOs to talk to this group to really show how the community would support them once they started. In addition to that, we have partnered with Heartland Community College to produce an Essential Workplace Skills EWS series out at Heartland Community College. It was piloted last year and actually launched at a BN by the Numbers a couple months ago. And this is a program that really focuses on incumbent workers and providing soft skills. This was something that came out of a survey about 2 years ago that really focused on employers needing folks to have those essential workplace or those soft skills. And so this was a series that was developed through Compact and the Chamber and Heartland Community College to do that. So in addition to that, the 60 by 25 network that Charlie mentioned. This is a network with the State Board of Education that we're working with, and we actually are focused on a program with our high schools about a high school endorsement project, high school diploma endorsement project, I'm sorry. And so that is something that we're working to try to see in McLean County in general, how we're providing those opportunities to our youth. So those are some of the projects that we're working on. In 2020, some of the things that we're looking to do is actually a collaborative effort with the EDC and doing a community assessment of all workforce initiatives that are happening in McLean County and how we can better move the mark on a few things. And so we are, in addition, we also have written for and were approved for, not awarded, approved for an AmeriCorps Vista grant to help us with that, with the community assessment and some of reassessing some of the employer engagement pieces and education pieces, and actually collaborating with all of our communities and our neighborhoods here in Bloomington and Normal, so which is a federal funded entity. So we're going to be working with that in 2020 as well. So exciting things that are happening with the McLean County Community Compact. And we are, as Charlie said, a separate 501c3, and I report to my own board of directors. And so those are some of the things that we're doing. If that answers, I think that answered all your questions, Mr. Nord.
There was
I just want to interject one point on this. This is information that we covered in the joint meeting about a month and a half ago. All this information, this is the second time it's been presented to this council. I think the cogent point here that's going to come up, and it may come up in your questions, is why does the chamber have this? Mm-hmm. And this was a Bloomington Normal Advantage initiative to work on workforce development. We considered it a very, very important undertaking for the community to do that. Traditionally, workforce development falls under the Economic Development Council. And at the time this started, the Economic Development Council was not able to take that charge up. And the chamber said, we're willing to take this on. We know that we need to be separate on this project, that it's not a chamber project, it's a Bloomington Normal Advantage project and a community project. So in the sense that this would normally be an EDC project is true, but because the chamber took it on and is actually has been doing a very good job with workforce development, I know that we see the value in continuing it. I know Charlie's in discussion with Patrick at Economic Development Council about how that goes forward, but right now they've done a lot of work, and they're in the lane, and they're going. So that's why this is at the chamber at this moment. Mr. Nord.
Sure. There are some businesses that are not chamber members that had communicated, I'm not a chamber member, this is taxpayer money. How can I be a part of this program? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So as I'm kind of in my opening comments stated, while it's under the purview of the chamber as a wholly owned subsidiary, Compact is a regional effort. So hence the name McLean County Community Compact. And so we have people on our board that are very specific to not represent necessarily chamber members, but we've got nonprofit organizations. We have the United Way. We have school systems. We have the regional superintendent. We want to make sure that we're inclusive of all the needs that we're looking at from a talent pipeline development, because it doesn't matter the background or whether someone's from a chamber member company or not from a chamber member company. All tides raise the ships, right? And so ultimately, we want to find that way to create that career pathway, to create that talent pipeline for any business that has invested here. So that's a little different from the point you're making from a chamber who would pay a membership, because that's how we look after their interests, because they've invested by membership. That's why Compact is a wholly owned subsidiary. While it's under the chamber's umbrella, they are managed by their own board, who make sure that we're looking at comprehensively across not only Bloomington Normal, but all of McLean County, that it is certainly inclusive and intended to be inclusive. And so we communicate that as best we can with every opportunity, whether it be electronically or whether it be in person, whether it be going to any kind of organization, to Kiwanis and Rotary, and putting on the Dog and Pony Show, having the opportunity to present to councils, joint councils a few months ago. Every opportunity we have to put on a public discussion about the work that we're doing and how we can engage anyone who wants to be part of that process. We welcome them to the table, and not just to hear the conversation, but to sit at the table and to lend their ear and lend their voice.
Okay. And Mr. Mayor, the way that I understood it from your response, this is probably just a this year funding. Probably going forward, it'll be more coordinated through the EDC. Is that kind of the?
I would say my conversations with Patrick Hoban would be that he would hope that would eventually go back to the EDC. I can't tell you any timeline on that, because again, you have a group that's effectively doing what the EDC would do, but they've got structure, they've got momentum, they've been meeting on this. So I think that's really between the chamber, the compact, and EDC to figure that transition out. Ms. Lorenz, and then Ms. Smith, and then Mr. Preston.
Question for Charlie and Jancy. So on the 25,000, do you have a specific use in mind for it? And then how will we know if this investment achieves success? So what are your success measures? And then lastly, what if you were to not have this funding, what suffers?
Sure. So thanks for the opportunity to answer that. So how are we going to use it? And so Compact is built as a comprehensive budget, where it's a total line item of what we need to do in order to carry out the entire program of work. So there's a variety of projects, some of which Jancy talked about already, that all have individual budgets to make them happy or make them whole. So there aren't necessarily anything specific that that's $25,000 will be attributed to. Importantly, though, as we develop the metrics that we talked about earlier and the benchmarks of what we're looking to accomplish, we'll be very transparent in putting those out into our monthly newsletter onto the Compact website, and hearing from you as well if you had specific information that you would like to have back in return. Overall, we've got some overarching goals of Compact, and I guess from the strategic plan that was developed this last year. Everything that we do is being monitored and paid very close attention to by the board of directors of Compact, as well as the 4 different operating committees underneath of that, and then the 5 different programs underneath of that. So there's a variety of different levels of accountability that we do when we go to make sure that we're very open, we're very honest, and we're very transparent about how we're using those dollars to fulfill that program of work. So if we didn't have that $25,000, that will hurt the overall work that we do within Compact, whether or not it's, the becoming BN, too many BNs, to your point. Becoming BN, when we want to take a look at intentionally transferring college talent into being a resident in Bloomington Normal, making those intentional connections. Are there programs that we aren't able to afford or put together on that? Are there other programs that we're doing as it relates to our employer engagement summits from secondary and post-secondary? I can't tell you exactly what we would pull from right now, because I didn't come to say these are the ones we'd hatchet if we didn't have that funding necessarily come through. But all of them make the program work whole, and so the strategic plan is open and available, and I'm happy to share it with you. In fact, we might have had it it might have been, I know we sent a 2018 recap and part of 2019 in the packet that was provided, but we can provide 2020 going forward as well if you'd like.
Ms. Smith?
So as I understand it, because of the chamber's structure as a member organization, in order to pursue this, you created a separate 501c3 not-for-profit to address the mission of Compact as defined, but that is, as your letterhead says, a subsidiary of the chamber. If the Economic Development Council were to resume their oversight of this, can you speak to what legal matters might need to be addressed in order to effect that transfer?
So a lot of questions in that question, and I'll try to address all of them. I think first, and I should have written it down faster. What was the very first part of your question?
That it was necessary for you to create.
Yeah, got it. So we did not create Compact. Compact's been in existence for a very long while. They were under the U of I extension, and then they were at Heartland Community College, and really had kind of gone by the wayside and was really not being operated. And so as we started to do our work at the chamber, because as prescribed by the Being Advantage, that's when we went, there's an alignment where we can bring these synergies together and make sure that we're doing more with the resources that are available. So they had the 501c3 status already. So when we merged, we basically dissolved and reorganized to the McLean County Community Compact as a subsidiary of the chamber. And so we did that very intentionally for a couple things. But one is it is freestanding. So this organization could come up and go somewhere else really at any point in time. However, I would add to you that would not be a recommendation from myself or likely my board of directors, as they've been very vested in the work that we've been doing in the workforce area for the last 2 or 3 years. And I would also tell you that if there's a Chamber of Commerce that isn't involved in workforce development, they're remiss and they're not paying attention to the needs of their members. Because right now, trying to find talent when you have an under 3% unemployment rate is almost near impossible for some of these companies to do. And so for those who are members of the chamber and that are not members of the chamber, where is that talent going to come from? So I would tell you that that will continue to be a focus of ours going forward to make sure that we're fulfilling the needs of what those businesses are, to find that talent pool, whether or not we're raising them locally, whether or not we're transferring them from post-secondary to local, or if we have to go out and recruit them to come here. Now there are lots of partnership opportunities that come for that. There's more work than any 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 organizations can do with this. When we first started Compact, there are 17 organizations that were logic modeled that we wrote out to make sure that we were walking together and not crossing paths. And so I will tell you that there is a whole lot of opportunity that we can go further with the resources that we have if we do continue to work together with this asset mapping and community mapping that Jancy talked about to make sure that we're combining resources and allocating the time necessary. Jancy is a full-time employee, and with the grant we just received with 2 additional full-time members of Vista, there's a lot of opportunity to really take this program of working forward. So to pick it up and move it somewhere else, or to pick it up and try to start sharing responsibility, I don't think would become advised from myself or our board of directors.
Thank you. Mr. Preston?
Thanks. Another question for the chamber. Mr. Moore, you mentioned the 60 by 25 goal, and I believe I heard you say that we're about 57% or so as a community, give or take. What is that in terms of real numbers in order to get from the 57 to the 60? How many additional working age adults in McLean County are we talking about?
It's a great question. I don't think I have the answer to.
I do not have the answer to that.
I can certainly look into that and get back to you. We do follow very closely, so work with Illinois State University and all of our superintendents as where those numbers are compiled from, so we can get that data and certainly report back.
Okay. And then second, this $25,000 that you're requesting tonight, how does this compare to other community stakeholders that are invested into Compact?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, this would be the ask for public money for the total budget would be about 22% in total of what the Compact's budget is. And so we have asked for, so of the money that we'd asked for from the public money, 42% would come from Normal, and we're asking for 58% of that to come from Bloomington.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you. First, thanks for coming tonight and fielding the questions and reiterating some of your points. I never get tired of hearing about how we're advancing the lives of young people. So I particularly pay attention and perk up when we talk about upskilling high schoolers and college-age kids and connecting them with our local businesses. Stopping brain drain being one of the ultimates, that we make those connections right to our local employers who are trying to grow and expand.
and that you're helping to develop talent for our local businesses so they can grow. I'm always a big fan. About half the way through your long list of programs and initiatives, I went, wow, all that for $25,000? That's an amazing value. Also, what I'm particularly impressed about what you guys have been able to do in the past few years is make this an 80% private business funded initiative. We've struggled with that in this community to make these types of initiatives principally private funded rather than principally public funded. As you recall, I've been on several benchmarking trips with the chamber around, and we've seen most very successful communities have this type of a model where principally the initiatives are funded by the business community rather than the public body. So kudos for getting that done and starting to change how these type of community initiatives that help not only the community but our young people and our businesses get done. I really, really appreciate that. So I'm also interested in Mr. Preston's question about how many students, just not for anything else other than, so Mr. Preston stole one of my questions, but it's a great one, and I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
A lot. So with all you have on your plate, and we look at other communities doing this, it seems to me $25,000 is an amazingly small amount to try to change workforce development in a community. Can you speak to that at all? Give me an idea.
I'll start, and Jancy can kick in. So there is not one business that isn't affected by workforce development. Every business, whether they're an at-home basement business or if they've got 15,000 employees, that's the first thing that most businesses tell us every day is we've got to have people. Guess what? Now that we have people, they got to have the soft skills. And once they have the soft skills, they got to be coachable to move up into management. And so those are all parts that we're looking at, whether we're working with the Illinois Community College Board or the State Board of Education or our local superintendents. We're gathering input and we're engaging with everyone in that process. And so I would tell you that, of course, what we do is look at best practices, right? So the Chamber's form of R&D is to rip off and duplicate what's happening well in other communities. And there are a lot of communities doing amazing work. So there's one that Jancy and I have been paying a close attention to in South Kentucky. Chattanooga's doing some amazing stuff. Southwest Alabama has some amazing programs. Springfield, Ohio. There are a lot of benchmarking best practices in workforce development where chambers and their communities are coming together in order to affect change. And so if we don't affect change, then we're wasting your money and our time. At the end of the day, we've got to move the needle. And so how do you measure that? It's really difficult because you know what? This doesn't happen overnight. When you're trying to take an 8th grader and turn them into talent pipeline, you got a minimum of 4 years before you're going to see that impact. And so how do we start? So not only do we have to work on how we grow our local talent, starting in secondary education and working with the students who are already in post-secondary. When you look at the number of students we have in our backyard that come from out of town to go to school between Wellesley and Illinois State University, we have an untapped number of potential employees for our community. That's where becoming bien, what Jancy was talking about earlier, how do we engage them in getting them off campus to come in and see who we are? We hear all too often that you don't know Bloomington Normal unless you live there or you engage there. So how do we do that with this amazing talent that we have right up the street and make sure that they can plug in and make those intentional connections with our employers, with the businesses, so they can transition from student into being an employee? So there are all the best practices that we could come up with. We could daydream a lot of ways to spend a whole lot of money. But at the end of the day, we're trying to be very conservative with what our ask is to make sure that as we move forward, we can show you progress bit by bit. So when we have progress, then we can continue to get the private sector more engaged, because to the point that you made, when they see progress, they are willing to invest. And we will continue to go out and ask private sector to invest more, because while it's not a sexy topic to say workforce development and kind of makes your head fall to the side a little, it's vitally important for their success and to protect their investment they have with their company here in town.
Thank you.
Further on this item, please call the roll.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item D is an ordinance amending Section 17.3-2 and 17.9-3 of the Municipal Code of the Town of Normal regarding the prohibited possession and use of cannabis, cannabis paraphernalia, and drug paraphernalia. Mr. Nord.
I so move.
Second.
My question just goes to one of the points of this ordinance, which is if you sell to a minor, there's just a financial penalty. Specifically, a dispensary that repeatedly sells to a minor or sells to minors, does the town have any control over like what we can do if that happens, or is that all regulated by the state?
I will defer to Mr. Day, who I believe previously indicated in response to your inquiry, provided information that the State Department of Regulation, what's it called? State Department?
Yeah, as we've talked about before, the way that the statute is written, the town doesn't have any licensing authority over any of the cannabis businesses. That's all controlled through the state. With respect to dispensaries, their licensing would be done through the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, who's got systems in place for their suspension and revocation procedures for licensees who violate the statute. But there's nothing, they don't have a state license or a town license that we could take action against like we could with, say, an alcohol establishment.
So if we have a problem dispensary, our hands are kind of tied. Is that right?
If we have well, there's a number of law enforcement activities we could take, not just the ordinance violations that are in this statute, but there's criminal sanctions for people who violate the statute as well. So there's certainly, between our ordinance violations, criminal statutes, and the actions that the state can take, there's certainly recourse. But it would be through the investigation and enforcement, not the license revocation, which would be handled through the state.
To echo on what Mr. Nord's asking here, we do have the authority to do stings.
Certainly, yeah, we can
in
go
the same way we
in
do with alcohol.
Underage buyers, the way we do with tobacco or alcohol. We just couldn't revoke their license. That would have to go through the state process.
Thank you. Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item E is a motion extending the Diabetes Disease Management Program for 1 year. Mr. Nord?
I so move.
Second.
The question is, I guess one of my questions is, with this diabetes management, we've got at least one private company who we sell insurance and health services to. Are we going to be paid back for those non-town employees that are receiving these town benefits?
And Mr. Nord, you're specifically referring to Serban, because I don't know of any other group you're speaking about. Would
I
it
don't
just
know.
be
Is
Serban?
Serban the only one?
As far as I know, that's the only group of 3 individuals that participate in our plan that reimburse the municipality for payroll and benefits services. So for those 3 individuals, the cost of this diabetes program is built into our health insurance premiums. So as shared previously, when those employees participate in our benefit program, Serban is invoiced and pays for the cost of those benefits.
Okay, so they do get a prorated amount charged to them?
Well, it's built into the cost of premiums for all 600 cover lives. So their monthly premiums would be paid when we invoice them.
Well, what I'm getting at, I mean, the town employees don't pay the premiums. Isn't theirs 100% covered?
For single coverage, that is correct.
Okay, so for Serban staff, are they 100%, I mean, are they charged a premium? Or is the company?
The Serban organization is invoiced every month for the cost of payroll and benefits. If an individual employee at Serban, there's only 3. If they have individual coverage, they have a certain premium that's charged to Serban. If they have family coverage, there's a premium. If they have employee plus spouse or employee plus children, whatever their particular benefit selection is, the cost of that fringe benefit is charged to Serban each month. Is that clear?
So this benefit is, or this costs the town, what is it, $40,000? Is it divided by, you said we had 600 and some employees, is it divided by 600 and some? And then those 3 at Serban, are they billed the prorated amount?
No, Mr. Nord, we have 600 plus covered lives
Okay,
in our insurance plan. Some are spouses, some are children, some are employees. And the cost of this benefit is built into our health insurance expenses. And so every year, because we are self-funded, we look at the cost of claims, we look at the cost of brokerage and broker services and fixed costs, and we calculate the cost of that insurance program each year, and that cost and our projected claims for the next year are how we calculate premiums.
okay.
So
Taxpayers.
those premiums are then invoiced to Serban each month.
Okay, so there is some dollar amount that they're charged for this as a premium, is that right? Because town staff, or the town does not pay a premium. Or the town staff does not pay a premium.
If you have single coverage, employees do not contribute towards the cost of that coverage. The town pays for an employee who has single coverage. For the invoice to Serban, we would charge Serban whatever the premium is for single coverage or employee plus family coverage or employee plus spouse or employee plus children. So whatever coverage those 3 individuals choose, there's a monthly premium that's applied to that, and Serban pays that.
So if it's just, say, 1 employee, no family, do they get charged a premium or do they receive that for no
They
charge?
being Serban or they being the employee?
The employee. Well, Serban.
Yes, Serban is covering the cost of that benefit.
What the taxpayers have paid for that benefit. Is that right?
I'm not following that question.
For this one particular benefit, I'm assuming it's like $40,000. Does Serban pay some dollar amount back to the town for offering that to any of their employees? Or any
Well,
of their?
How I can explain it is we figure our health insurance program will cost the town of Normal approximately $5.5 million a year, let's say. I don't know if that's right, but I'm going to say it's approximately $5.5 million a year to provide insurance. That's to cover all the claims because we're self-funded, is to cover fixed costs, reinsurance costs, cost of drugs, doctor visits, everything else. Let's say we need $5.5 million. That $5.5 million also includes the cost of this program. So overall, for the whole year, to cover doctor's visits, prescription drug costs, brokerage services, reinsurance costs, diabetes management, and any other expenses of the health fund, we would need enough income to pay that $5.5 million. So that's how we figure our premiums. And so everything we charge back to Serban on a monthly basis then includes health claims costs, prescription drug costs, any cost of this diabetes program or anything else we offer through the health insurance program. So yes, Serban is charged this because it's built into the cost of that monthly premium.
I would just like to see a copy of one of these bills that we send Serban because I'm not following, but we can do that outside of this meeting. But thank you.
Sure, what you'll see in the invoice is the charge for 3 individuals and their cost of their salaries and their cost of their fringe benefits that covers that monthly personnel expense. What we don't typically do is share any information that would identify what kind of coverage an individual has. So we wouldn't identify that employee X has single coverage, employee Y has employee plus family, and employee A has employee plus children. So you would just see the total dollar amount charged to Servant.
I'm just interested to see that taxpayers are being reimbursed.
I understand that.
Just for the record, I'm going to say this question has been asked multiple times in different ways, been in multiple times, and the answer is always the same. Servant pays their way. That's always been the answer. That will continue to be the answer. Mr. Preston.
Yeah, no, that's right. I was just going to clarify
Ms. Smith.
to make sure that
Thank
the
you.
question and answer were both clear for everybody up at the table, but
Thank you.
you've done that.
I just want to applaud the town for including pre-diabetes in this program, because while there may be a perception that diabetes is a disease that is manageable because of insulin, it is a chronic disease with serious ramifications that affect circulation, can lead to amputation, blindness, and the sooner someone addresses this and gets treatment and manages the disease, the better. And so this is a phenomenal program to tackle such an ailment, and the comments from the employees that are in the program attest to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
Just a quick follow-up. Couldn't agree with Ms. Smith anymore. Diabetes is, if you are in the health field, you probably know it's the fastest growing disease for modifiable behaviors in the United States. Expected to outstrip heart disease and everything else before too terribly long. So the cost of insulin and treatment is escalating very, very rapidly. So it's not a static cost. The cost of care and cost of coverage and cost of meds is accelerating exponentially. So not only are more people becoming pre-diabetic and diabetic, but the cost to treat them is going higher and higher and higher. So prevention is really the if there's a magic bullet, the only one we have. So I also applaud us for including that.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved. We have two items of new business. The first is a motion to approve the fiscal year 2019-2020 to fiscal year 2024 to 2025 Community Investment Plan. Reese?
Thank you.
Oh, we need a motion for both.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is the annual time of year when we share with Council the capital investment that we are recommending, including in the proposed budget. We are scheduled to have a review of our proposed budget in mid-January. For now, I'm going to invite Mr. Hune, Mr. Aldrich, and Mr. Otto forward. And Andrew, do you mind moving that poinsettia, because it's not located well.
I kinda like it there.
You didn't get to see Mr. Moore very well, so I apologize for that. But.
Okay, I can still see it.
Mr. Hune is going to explain a little bit about the actual plan, how one can access it, and how it functions. And then I've asked Mr. Aldrich and Mr. Otto to be prepared to talk about specific projects and how we have come to recommend those projects. We, of course, have other projects that are outside of the typical engineering or public works realm that would typically involve parks and recreation or facilities management. As we indicated in our council report, this particular CIP, which is how we refer to it, has 134 capital projects with an estimated $94.5 million in proposed spending over the next 5 years. We're proud of the document. Of course, if we had additional funding, we would, of course, add more projects. But I think this is a document that you'll find has a lot of information. We are proud of the capital investment and community investment that we are recommending. But after Mr. Hughes' initial presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you. City Manager Reese did a good job explaining what this is. I'll give a little more detail and context because it really is probably one of the first formal things this council gets in terms of our budget process. It's the current year spending projection as of today, and then 5 out years as a proposed budget coming to you in January. What happens every year is staff, as we start the budget process, the department heads that are most impacted by this, which is Public Works, Parks and Rec, Facility Management, and Engineering, go through, look at the plan again. It's a 5-year plan all the time. 1 year falls off, 1 year comes on, and we look at the roadmap again for capital spending. And really it boils into kind of just tweaking things here and there because we plan our work out 5 years and move towards that, but we also revise it every year to make sure we're evaluating in terms of that 5-year plan. There are multiple funding sources that support capital projects for the town. The almost $95 million of spending in the next 5 years comes from a variety of sources. One is the general fund, of course, which is our sales tax, our income tax, property tax, fines and fees, charges for services. We also get motor fuel tax from the state, which funds, as you expect, mostly roads and bridge projects. We get a lot of money from water and sewer fees that support those infrastructures and those operations in terms of sewer lines, water lines, and so forth. CDBG kicks in some money, and also parkland dedication. So there's a lot of money coming from a lot of different sources, and we categorize these into about 5 different categories just for viewing and for organization. And you can see in the report tonight, there's public facilities. These are essentially the town municipal owned and operated facilities that need to be maintained. We have capital assets, a section, and that category essentially accounts for all of our vehicle purchases, public work vehicles, waste trucks, ambulances, patrol vehicles, front loaders, and major equipment in terms of infrastructure for information technology and Parks and Rec. Transportation development is basically the roadway systems, the traffic lights, the curbs, sidewalks, bridges, and so forth. Parks and open space, and of course, all of our park amenities, from playgrounds to facilities. And then utility services, our last category is really water, sewer, and stormwater functions, which are supported by those organizations. In terms of the 5-year look to the new 5-year look, last year our 5-year look, or our 6-year look, current year plus 5 years in the budget, was $88.3 million of spending. Our revised look for the 5 years is now almost $95 million, as City Manager Reese mentioned. We have had a couple areas that have increased in funding, mostly in transportation development, which again, this is the roadways. This is funded essentially by general fund and by motor fuel tax. That has increased quite a bit, about $6 million over the last year 5-year plan. That money is essentially coming from the state's increase in local motor fuel tax, the 19.5 cents increase. That's being given to us through a process, through a formula, and we are essentially making that expenditure on the roadways. The next big increase in terms of spending ability and resources came from utility services. This, of course, is, and a lot of you are kind of, nodding your head, yes, I understand this, because this came from mostly water increase some of its spending in capital. They spend about $4 to $5 million a year for infrastructure needs. And then, of course, sewer, as this council is well aware, we did the master plan a couple years ago that drove a lot of decisions in terms of new projects going forward to maintain the system and sewer lining and televising and so forth, and ultimately capital projects that will maintain that system even better. That was funded more through a rate process, so we're seeing more capital there. So again, we are very proud of this document. We hope it's useful in terms of understanding the information. As City Manager Reese mentioned, if we have more funding, we'll do more. $95 million is a lot of money to spend in the next 5 years in terms of those areas. The department heads that are most affected by this, they look at the spending plan and what they can do in capacity, what's available in funding, and we present this to you at this time. Also, we do show this as available and as a usable kind of format on the town website. I can go out there, just go under governments, under finance. And there we go. And community investment plan. And you can see we, in terms of transparency and some documentation, we keep several years of this 5-year plan out there. It's in a PDF format. And then the newest plan, we kind of keep as like an interactive format, which is this is the one in front of you tonight. And I'll just go through a few items here, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues who can speak to more detail in terms of what the projects are. I have what I refer to as an accountant's knowledge of this information, which means I know how much it costs and where we're going to spend it and where it comes from. But detail-wise, I'll leave to the experts like these gentlemen on my left and right. But you can see in terms of interactiveness, again, I referred to the several different funding sources. We divide that in our budget and accounting records to kind of show those funding sources separately. A lot of that's for either specific compliance for motor fuel tax or just for our own management convenience to control the accounts. We have a capital fund, MFT, water, sewer, stormwater, parkland. I won't go through all of it. You can see you can pick these and you pull them pretty quickly. We'll pull up MFT here, and this automatically shifts you to a document that shows the projects. Of course, it's transportation development is the category. It shows all the current fiscal year spending plan and all the out years. And you can just kind of roll over these projects. We can just pick one at random here. We'll take Franklin Avenue Bridge, and it'll pull up a little more detail in terms of some narrative, some better engineering costs, who's kind of in charge of it from the town, and of course a picture which you can open up to and take a little look at. That's obviously the bridge that's over by the Roman facility. And I will just close that if I can, and then back here. Again, we can scroll through a couple more of these too to give you an idea of how it works. I won't spend a lot of time on it. Sewer. Again, this is an area where we had a big uptick in the spending related to the assessment that was done a couple years ago, and you can see now that we can see a lot of spending going on in terms of the out years. I can say a couple years ago this was pretty empty, and now with the decision the council made to do the study and to commit more funding to the infrastructure, that's helped. We'll just pick Kaiser and College here, and again, I'm just kind of randomly doing this, but you can pull up again a platform or a picture, and that's not readable, but you can scroll it down, and that'll just give you a sense of where those lines are being affected in the overall process. So with that, I will turn it over either back to City Manager Reese or to these gentlemen to talk more about it. I didn't have to say in each of these are the funded areas. There's always going to be an unfunded category. These are the areas we'd want to do more if we had more funds available. You can see them down here, and each category has, or each funding source has, and category has some unfunded stuff. You can see in terms of the capital fund, which is primarily funded by general fund, there are other needs that we would like to ultimately satisfy and will over time, but it's an issue of priority and funding and so forth. But a lot is being done now. Obviously, more can be done. This comes to you tonight for kind of I would categorize it as asking for approval to move forward, and then if you do approve this, that vote essentially programs this into the budget that you'll see in January again, and certainly can be changed going forward, but this is kind of staff requesting you to say, yes, this makes sense, or no, can you add these projects in, or get more questions from this on that. So with that, I'll turn it back to Mr. Manager Reese and these gentlemen.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Hune. As he mentioned, we do at each category, capital, motor fuel tax, water, sewer, parkland dedication, et cetera. Each category, we have a section that we show as proposed project not recommended. Those are our unfunded projects. We consider that as important as the funded projects because the unfunded projects are our planning. That's just our planning stage. We have said many, many times that our mantra is we plan our work and we work our plan. So we always want to know what projects and what needs are out there. And then we will prioritize based on the need and the funding, of course. And at least we have a continual list. We will always have a continual list of projects that we can add into our funded category if funds permit, but also if priorities change. If we learn something during the year that changes the circumstances, we know what's involved in the project and we can swap and flip projects. We try to be relatively flexible and nimble as possible. So with that, we will certainly be prepared to answer any questions council might have about any of the categories or the proposed projects for.
Questions? Ms. Lorenz?
I do have a specific question on the pedestrian rail crossing that's in capital fund. Got a couple of line items there for this year and next year. What are those addressing?
Yeah, this is the, you see, it's called pedestrian railroad crossing, so that is the underpass project. So the funding, which looks like about $650,000 this year and next year, is still the continuation of the Phase 1 engineering project. So we currently have a consultant, that's WSP, selected for that work under contract, and we'll continue working on the Phase 1, which is basically conceptual design of the project, including surveys and utility work, things like that. Actually, we have a kickoff meeting with the Federal Railroad Administration tomorrow regarding the grant that we were awarded. So that and we'll begin the coordination with the FRA, and then we're still trying to coordinate with, or we are coordinating with the railroad regarding the type of structure we're going to put in. So again, we're about in the, the middle of that process. So hopefully with this grant, we'll continue to move, and that'll provide some inspiration for the railroad to keep working with us and other things, but that's what that's for.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Smith? Did you have?
My question is about the road work. That's your purview.
I don't think your microphone's on.
Ms. Smith, I don't think your microphone's on.
Sorry about that. How do you determine which roads are going to get a complete repaving and which are simply patchwork?
Sure, great question. We take a look at the roads in terms of their condition. Some roads have minor potholes. We can fill those. We work very closely and coordinate with Public Works that have the staff and capability to do that. When streets get beyond minor maintenance type work, then it's typically turned over to the engineering department, where we'll evaluate whether or not the road needs a full rebuild, whether or not we need to take it down to dirt basically and then build it back up, or if we can mill off the surface or resurface it in some way. So we take a look at each situation uniquely and determine what to do based on the condition of the road and the resources we have available each year.
Well, I know that there was one citizen who's expressed a great deal of frustration over finding so many locations with potholes. What is the season for road repair? When do you stop? And when can you start up again on the major road projects?
Sure. Our construction season typically runs mid-March through mid-November. We try to wrap things up preferably before November 1st, just because the weather gets iffy after November 1st. So major road repairs would take place during that approximately 6 to 8 month period. We typically don't do any major road repairs. The asphalt plant shut down. Concrete becomes expensive to pour because we have to protect it from the cold weather. And so typically, due to cost and availability of contractors, we don't do any major road repair. During those times, we are working with Public Works, and Wayne can talk a little bit more about pothole filling and those operations. Those operations go on continually throughout the year.
In terms of the motor fuel tax, that's a substantial increase that you're anticipating with the state's increase in that. Percentage-wise, how much more miles do you think you can cover in the town with this additional funding than you've been able to in prior years?
I don't have an exact number because it depends on the roads that we select. Some roads are 4 lanes wide and we can't do, the dollars don't stretch near as far lengthwise. But we look at the funding in terms of dollars. I think we expected around $800,000 additional
Right,
per year.
we've got about $750,000 to $800,000 more in MFT money than they had in the past without that rate increase the state did. And that buys a certain amount of roadway.
Per year?
Correct.
Yes.
So it's a significant increase. So we're very thankful for that.
Thank you. Mr. Norton?
Mr. Aldrich, did you want to talk a little bit about your maintenance?
About potholes, because potholes are an issue year-round typically, and usually worse in the winter period when we have many freeze-thaw cycles and there's more moisture in the ground. So this is the method that we use to fill the holes in the pavement, and primarily these are joint distress issues. So you'll see them in concrete pavements and also asphalt pavements, but they're just holes in the pavement that we need to feed and fill and react to immediately. It's at the best a temporary repair. It always is. It's done one shovelful at a time. We throw a special mix in these holes, and depends on what the conditions are, how long that lasts. Typically over the summer periods, it does quite well, and over the winter periods, we're just trying to get, the hole filled and it lasts as long as possible. There are different methods to do this work. However, they involve a lot more time and a lot more money. So those are some judgment calls that we have to make, as we proceed. But I can also say pretty much all year round we've got pothole crews working. Again, typically over the winter period, there's more crews working when we can spare the crews to do that type of work. The other thing I'd like to mention on the maintenance end, it's not a capital project issue, but in working with engineering, we're trying to do a lot of maintenance on the bigger roads, the major arterial roads, because they would be very expensive if we'd have to resurface those or do other major repairs. So we're trying to extend the life of those roads as long as possible. So the last couple of summers, you'll see Public Works out doing some patching work and joint repairs on those roads as well, trying to get them to last as long as possible so we don't get into major capital improvements, sooner. The other technique we're using under contract is we seal cracks in these concrete pavements as well, and I think that'll help extend the pavement life as well.
Mr. Mayor, one final question. I'm still confused geography-wise, but which roadways are not Normal's responsibility because they come under the state or federal purview?
In Normal, it's primarily Main Street, and we actually do.
And Kingsley, correct?
Kingsley, yes. Main Street, Kingsley, the couple that is US 51 through town. So, but to clarify that, there's portions we actually do under contract maintain for the state. So we do plowing and we do minor maintenance on those segments. Basically, it's from Willow south. I think we do have maintenance agreement on that piece. But again, that's been debated before. What is minor maintenance, which is ours, and what is major maintenance?
And Mr. Aldrich, you want to reference Veterans Parkway as well?
Sorry. But yeah, Veterans Parkway is also a state route. And we don't have maintenance responsibilities on Veterans Parkway.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Nord?
Who sets the priorities? Is that something that staff does? Do you get input from the council?
We take a look at the streets based on condition, traffic. The rate of deterioration affects the prioritization as well. Right now, we are in the process of rating all of our streets. We received a $100,000 grant from the IDOT, the state of Illinois, to bring our street rating system onto the same level. We currently have a rating system that has 2 or 3 different levels or rating systems, so it's difficult to compare all of our streets and get a true prioritization based on condition, based on surface type, based on width, and all the other factors we look at, traffic loading, things like that, and specifically rate of deterioration. So we're in that process. We hope to begin officially in the spring and have that concluded in time for next year's prioritization work for resurfacing.
And I would say we certainly work on the maintenance end. If there's something we're seeing, we always talk to engineering, and if we're constantly out on a roadway segment, we'll talk about what else can be done.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll add to that is they're specifically talking about roadway projects, but for other projects such as water and sewer, stormwater, those projects are determined based on an assessment or the master plan that's been adopted. We've prioritized the capital needs, which is how we ask council to set the rates to fund those. And in regard to projects such as facilities or parks, The park projects are determined either by the Parks and Rec Master Plan or by the need and as assessed by staff for playground replacement. And what is the condition and such, that's all staff determined. And for facilities, that is assessed generally by staff, sometimes by an assessment by an architect in regard to status of a building envelope, what needs to be repaired in a priority basis.
Yeah, my question was more towards like all the capital fund projects or any project on a sheet, or all the projects on a sheet. Who sets those, like doing the Route 66 trail connection versus more road work? Is that something that staff does versus the council?
Many of those that are,
Go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Many of those that are on there are based on past council priorities. They're projects that are continuing on with multi-year projects. Others, for instance, the bridge projects you see, the Franklin Avenue Bridge, the Glen Avenue Bridge, and many of the culverts, those are set based on staff, what we're seeing as far as the bridge conditions. We switched things up a little bit this year based on the conditions we were seeing in the field. We saw some deterioration on a couple bridges that we wanted to bring forward and do earlier, and thought we could push a couple others out. So we vary those and vary the years based on how long the design is going to take, the permitting, and the condition of the bridge.
And the availability of grant funds, in particular, the Kelly Detention Basin, we did receive a grant, so we obviously have timelines that we want to comply with for that.
I don't know if this is the time to get into the detail for these, but I saw that like Rivian are out there by Rivian, College Avenue, that's not scheduled to be done for 2 years? Is that right?
Right.
That road is, I mean, bad.
Right now, in the motor fuel tax fund, you'll see, I believe, $650,000 programmed into the next fiscal year, the upcoming fiscal year of 2021. That is for a Phase 1 study. The Phase 1 study would identify design alternatives, would identify permitting, would identify in various different funding sources as well. So that is the Phase 1 engineering study that would make us eligible for different funding types, whether it be federal, state, local.
As a reminder, we did include that project on our proposed capital grant, state capital grant, or capital bill funding priorities. That particular project of West College Avenue from White Oak to Rivian Motorway, we anticipate to be $6 to $7 million.
And I would add to that the acceleration of Rivian on that site has gotten the state's attention, and they realize the need not only for the community to have that road rebuilt, but for the viability of Rivian and its suppliers to move back and forth along that road. So it's become a priority for the state as well.
Oh, yeah, and if it's a priority for the town too, then we might have to reprioritize some of these other non-critical projects to free up funds so we can repair that road, because $5.5 million, that's a lot of money that's got to come from somewhere. And if priorities have changed, when was this redone and the priorities reset? Was it done recently? Because we just had a citizen summit. There was a lot of information that came in from the community as well. We had a work group meeting. Has all that information been distilled and put into these priorities?
No, not specifically. The Citizen Summit, which occurred less than 2 weeks ago, I think, maybe 14 days ago. This document, the town's budget process, including the capital investment program, has been staff-driven since about August. We've been working on these. So in terms of assessing projects and priorities and preparing the fiscal year 20/21 budget document and including the recommended capital investment.
So when is the proper time for council to put in their input as to which projects we think may need their priority readjusted?
I would say that the culture of the council has been to defer to the expertise of the town engineer, public works director, the water director, to understand professionally what needs to be done and bring that to us. We could completely disallow that if we chose to and realign all this, but I don't see any will on the council to second guess our professional staff on what priorities need to be done. I just don't see the need for that, or why would we have engineers and water professionals if we're, as laymen who are here to oversee the budget, second guess their professional work?
Because some of us may not feel the need to spend the money on the, say, pedestrian railroad crossing now, if we've got all these other expenses, or Trail East or whatever. You know, we just learned that we don't have the softball tournament anymore. You know, is that still a critical thing that we need to be spending money on? You know, are those parking lots going to be used? There's all this new information that has come about. And I'm not saying this street versus that street. I'm going to trust the staff to say which one that is, or which sewer versus that sewer, but I'm talking the bigger projects.
I would suggest then that you meet with Ms. Reese and go over this and make your recommendations to the council on how you want to rearrange the capital improvement plan.
So then what are we voting on tonight?
The plan will be adopted as part of the budget.
Okay, well, if we adopt this, does that mean we're pushing forward with the Trail East, with the underpass, with some of these other big projects that the community may want some involvement in?
These are capital improvement projects, not some of the, Trail East wouldn't really be part of the capital improvement.
Trail East is on here, site improvements, 210,000.
Again, what's your wish, Mr. Nord?
That my priorities, I don't feel have been put into this. I'm asking when the proper time is for me as an elected official to put my priority opinion.
Do you have your priorities tonight?
I've got questions, yeah.
I'm sorry?
I do have questions.
No, I had asked if you have your priorities, that you've gone through this document and you've said, here are my priorities as a member of the council, and I'd like the rest of the council to address these priorities.
That's why I'm asking if this is the proper time.
Is council willing to undertake that?
Undertake what?
Undertake going through readjusting the priorities of the capital improvement plan.
I can suggest that if Mr. Nord has some preferred projects that he would like us to consider, because we are to the point of getting close to preparing the budget document for council to review in January, we can always make changes before the council actually formally adopts a budget in March. But in terms of a budget document and looking at fund balances and such, if Mr. Nord, if you have priorities that you would prefer take the place of some of these capital investments, if you want to share those with me, we can evaluate and figure out how we can address those within the proposed dollar amounts we have here for all the specific capital categories.
Well, I just don't want my vote tonight being something that approves the underpass, Trail East, and some other things, and I want to make sure that this is not what I'm doing.
Mr. Preston?
Yeah, so let me ask this. So we, one of the things that Mr. Nord referenced was that recently we just finished up both a citizen summit and then the next day our strategic planning session as a council, kind of setting priorities for the next 1, 5, 15 years and so on. Any change in those priorities that come out of that process, as it would relate to specific projects within the CIP, when would that be reflected? So for instance, if there was a change in priority from our strategic planning that also resulted then subsequently from the Citizen Summit, and that then, there are items within here, some of the larger projects that Mr. Nord was kind of talking about, would that be then adjusted in next year's CIP that staff would bring to us that, maybe since, X is not as much of a priority as it was before, but Y is, that that would then be reflected in the CIP. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that would probably be the most realistic timeline, considering we are wrapping up our proposed budget document for council review in January. Actually, about a month from now is when you'll be reviewing that document. And I have not received the written results from Mr. Summick yet to even react to from the Citizen Summit nor Council Strategic Planning Session. I certainly have my notes, but I would like to get the formal documents from him so we can play that through. And if there's changes that need to be made between the proposed budget and the final budget that you adopt in March, we can make those adjustments between January and March as well.
And I would add that we have not finished our strategic planning. We still have one more step to do on that. And if you will recall, we picked 8 to 10, 5 very high priority projects and 4 or 5 secondary high priority projects. We have not done that yet.
It's been a long one.
Ms. Lorenz?
And sorry,
I'm
Mayor,
sorry, Mr.
one more clarification. So then, to make sure that our newest council members understand as well, underpass being as good of an example as any, a vote for the CIP tonight, is that in effect a vote for the underpass?
No, this is a plan, and we would reflect this information into the budget, but actual spending dollars comes back to council for formal approval.
Ms. Lorenz?
Well, I just want to clarify, too, that my understanding on a number of these things, and Trailside East is another good example, where that $200,000 was part of a vote taken 6 months ago about that whole development project. And so it gets baked into this document. And as we make decisions and authorize direction, these are the line items that essentially come from a lot of those bigger decisions that happen. The pedestrian railroad crossing, when Mr. Aldridge talked about that being part of Phase 1, I think we authorized Phase 1 2015, 2017, something like that. And I think, it was a much bigger ticket item, so this is just parts of that larger ticket item that we authorized 2-3 years ago that's now coming to fruition, sort of marching down. These are multi-year projects. So I would caution us from very impetuously changing direction on things that need to be completed. I think, for instance, on Trailside East, if we were to pull out of that $200,000, if suddenly we said, that's not a high priority, that's got enormous ramifications to a larger decision. And so I would caution us from making a ready, fire, aim decision. We've got to think about ready, aim, fire, and be thoughtful and measured and think about the consequences of any kind of decision. Now, I'm not saying that, we couldn't talk about some things that are listed here as critical versus important versus flexible. I'm sure staff is open to that sort of input, but like the mayor said, the staff is here absorbing every word that is said here every 2 weeks. And so it's not like they just go back to their offices and, pull these out of the sky. They're listening to what we're saying. They're listening to our decisions. They were at the Citizen Summit. They hear about what happens at our strategic plan. They're not working in a vacuum. So I want to say that this is a very credible document. Yes, it's a living document, but it's a very credible document that's been built upon over the years. And in a short amount of time here, if the mayor so chooses, I would recommend that we call the question.
Before we call the question, Ms. Smith gets an opportunity to speak.
I just have one very
And Mr. McCarthy.
specific wish list item. Leave pickup is a very treasured service in the community. How many trucks do we currently have that can actually perform that function?
Typically, this isn't a capital item, it's more operational, but typically, 4 trucks we have fitted with leaf, you know, the beds and the vacuums. We can have as many as 5 trucks. But again, it's, this time of year, it's a resource, you know, allocation type of thing. But that's, and these trucks are also our salt spreading trucks and snow plowing trucks. And
Because for the second year in a row, leaves have gone to the curb and haven't been picked up before the snow hits them. And I know getting
Right.
wet complicates it.
And
so-
it's mother, you know, leaves drop late in the year, so it's complicated, but I think, you know, this snow slowed us down a bit, but I think, you know, we'll have 4 crews out as soon as we can.
But you're saying that's an operating item and not a capital item?
Typically, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I would just add, it's an operating item to run the operation, but the capital expense of those vehicles and trucks is baked into this document.
Mr. McCarthy, and then I need an opinion from Mr. Day.
I'm going to let you call the question. I'll
We've had
withdraw.
a call the question. Everyone has spoken on this item. Can you, are we on parliamentary ground here?
Call of the question will take 5 votes. It's a non-debatable, needs a second.
Okay, we have a vote to call the question.
Second.
Thank you. Please call the roll on that issue.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
No.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The question has been called and approved. Please call the roll on the motion to approve.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
No.
Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved. We have a request to adjourn to executive session to discuss matters of personnel, but before doing so, taking that motion, are there concerns or comments? Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah. As this is our last meeting before the holidays, I just want to say thank you to town staff for an excellent 2019 and all that you do. And for those of you who are working on our streets and outside that we just heard so much about, please pass along our gratitude for the crummy weather that they're going to exist in for the next several months. And we greatly appreciate all that you guys are getting out to do in the middle of really bad stuff, and our first responders as well, spending a lot of time out there, so we appreciate it. And I just wanted to highlight and say thank you to everybody who came out and participated in our Citizen Summit. I have heard nothing but positives from that, and a few follow-ups from a few people that reached out to me specifically and thanked us for doing that. And as we, I think all of us heard that night, are asking us to do more of those, so I'll be supporting a move to do that in the future.
Mr. Nord?
I just have a point of order for Mr. Day. Did you have a chance to look at that OMA section that we talked about?
Yes, I did. As this is a motion to go into a closed session for personnel under Section 2C1 of the Open Meetings Act, that section does have a caveat that says you can't use it to discuss the compensation of a specific employee subject to the Local Government Wage Increase Transparency Act. That specific act is found in 50 ILCS 155, and it doesn't apply here. That's an anti-pension spiking statute. And under that section, it deals with if you're paying a lump sum payment to an employee who has announced their intent to retire or quit. So unless we missed a really important announcement, that's not going to apply in this particular situation.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn to executive session.
approval.
Second.
To discuss matters of personnel. We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings? Aye. Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned to executive session. Thank you.
Mr. Fansler.
Where do we meet at?
Right back in that hallway.
Oh, in the
So
hallway?
you go out and it's the first door. So.
I want to verify something with you, just make sure I'm on the same page here. You didn't want your vote to move the Trail East project or the underpass, correct?
There's other ones too.
Well,
But yes, those are the two that I
big ones they
said.
haven't, yeah, those are the two you mentioned.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm stating your, I want to make sure I'm stating what you said
Yes,
correctly,
and Uptown 2.
which is,
Uptown 2.0 is on there as well, which is the development south of the tracks.
okay, I don't put equal signs between those two, Stan, so I don't always.
Sure.
I don't always think of them as being the same thing.
Yeah, it was a separate line item on there too,
Well, I'm just,
which unless you read the whole thing, you wouldn't know.
and I have a tendency not to equate those, and that's on me, okay? That's
fine.
just how but I want to make sure I had stated what you were saying correct. Okay?
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Very insignificant.